begin. Hi everybody, welcome to the panel on LLMs and bias. And today we'll start with the presentation from Nick. Please take it away.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Just speaking of, I guess, picking up for where the previous talk left off, I'm on the academic side of things. I'll try to make this sort of a broader audience. I was actually kind of adding a couple slides, realizing that maybe I should do some general introductions. So let me just start by saying what I am. I'm a political scientist here at Northeastern. I'm also in the Network Science Institute, and I do a lot of work in computer science with computer scientists. Sometimes pass myself off as one, depending on the context. I do work in a number of different areas, some of which kind of touch on journalism in various ways. I've done a bunch of work in sort of computation and text, many of which have involved visualization, including documents, debates, the way people connect ideas in their heads. I've done a fair amount of work using social media data, mainly because that's sort of where political text is, on hate speech, predicting elections, predicting COVID with scented candle reviews, which is sort of a little bit more off topic. You might have seen that. I've also been doing some stuff just like in the last few weeks on like polling data and stuff. So I've got various things which I contend are good ways of measuring polls using tracking the pollsters so you can see changes rather than just aggregating them all together. And if you want one-stop shopping for all the poll aggregators, like I've got an aggregator running just for the last few days. All right, so this particular talk is collaborative work with Lu Wang, Kai-Cheng, let's see, where did I have that? Zhao and Frederick Zhang. And it's, unfortunately, the title is kind of similar to the title of this panel. It's on media bias, and it's also on sort of thinking about aspects of AI, particularly sort of transparency and reproducibility as they intersect with measurements of media bias. And I sort of finished with that case study on Israel and Gaza, which is chosen because it's kind of like a hard test case and also kind of relatively small, at least for the purposes that I've got here. This is all AI slop generated images, as you can probably have guessed. Not too bad, but still slop. Okay, so media bias, this is one of the things I don't really need to pitch to this particular group. It's a very live topic. Last time I delivered a talk on this, Sulzberger had just given his statement about the importance of not neutrality and not wading into politics, blah, blah, blah. Obviously this time, the day before, was the post imbroglio that's still kind of bubbling away there. We'll see what happens there. In both of these cases, we have strong commitments by the producers of news towards what they consider to be non-bias, neutrality, balance, all these different concepts which mean very different things. They're all kind of just muddled together in their heads in ways that are sort of nicely illustrative of like how much there is still to unpack in this area. I'm not going to cite all the work. This is just a picture of that work cited in the paper. And this is kind of emerging out of computational approaches to media bias, which we've been kind of stuck in a rut in many branches of this work for a long time. This is an early work by Genska and Shapiro from 2006, which is basically coming at media bias from the same framework of like it's mixed. It's the same thing as partisanship. We just look at counting up words by Democrats, counting up words by Republicans. Maybe we use Congress as our baseline, and then we just look at our newspapers more like Democrats more like Republicans in their word use. Very sort of crude, one-dimensional word counting based approaches. And so these projects with my collaborators have all kind of emerged out of this sense of the limitations of these things. And it's particularly a challenge when you deal with like traditional mainstream news that have, as we just saw, like overt commitments to avoiding these sorts of measurable biases. They avoid this sort of partisan language that's used by politicians. That they strive for balance when they are quoting it or forced to include it. And particularly in all sorts of domains besides like high-level national politics, it's not nearly as clear like foreign policy, local stuff, intra-party stuff, certain subdomains like economics or culture. But the key thing that we're kind of focusing on here is no matter how much they strive for balance, how much they avoid neutral language or they adopt neutral language, they still have to choose what to report. And so a lot of this work has been focused on trying to capture the what's at the more granular level. So again, it's a bunch of different papers, most of which have been in the computer science world. I'm trying to sort of now push it out a little bit. I should already be clear, this is kind of moving in a bunch of different directions, and I'll be interested to hear any feedback or suggestions for what to do in terms of pitching this to a broader audience. So I'll just say very briefly, there's too much here for 12 minutes. Basically, the approach is we're using large language models that are aware of syntactic and semantic features that go beyond just particular words, that we're trying to find actual structures in these texts. We're not just asking large language models to just tell us what they think or what they judge about bias. We're creating different structures here that combine traditional large language models and maybe networks of different entities like nouns, people, places, things, and how they relate to each other. So some of the early work was looking at sort of how different media depict sort of positive or negative statements towards people on the left, people on the right, as a way of getting at how the bias is revealed, not in what they overtly do, but just in who they choose to quote and what light they choose to quote them in. And so I don't have time to go into the details, but the key thing here is that we find all sorts of asymmetries between left and right. Between everybody has a bias towards negativity, but the left media, as we were rating them, are sort of more biased in the positive direction, and the right media is more biased in the negative direction. So this was like some early projects basically looking at sort of nouns and adjectives. Then the second phase was like, okay, that's all very well and good, but actually, the news media actually try to balance that too. They try to balance sort of positive depictions of Democrats, negative depictions of Democrats, and vice versa. And so what we really wanted to do was kind of go beyond that and look at the values that underlie these things, not just left-right ideology, but also sort of moral values and the events that are being reported on. And the key thing that we were interested in is like, when you're reporting on a news story such as Israel and Gaza and the war between the two of them, every event that you report on has all sorts of values associated with it. And even if you're trying to balance left-right, you're still choosing events to report, and those events have associated moral values, and there's many different ways of measuring them. This one is just looking at one of a typology of 5 moral values where care and harm are sort of the things being portrayed there. And again, we find all sorts of interesting asymmetries between ostensibly left and right leaning media about, they're all much more likely to, so the left media is more likely to report on news events where a right entity that is like a Republican or a conservative is harming a liberal, and the right-leaning media are more likely to report on news where a left entity is harming a right entity. So, it's the sort of thing that you would expect, but it's getting, again, down out of the overt partisan language and into sort of the events and the morality associated with events themselves. All right, so we got like 3 minutes here, and I'm already so far behind that I'm going to have to skip ahead. So there's, what's that?
Yes, 5.
5 according to. There's a couple of thoughts about this. So we did this project. We stood up a bunch of tools. The tools lasted for a while. The problem with this kind of approach is that it requires these many billion parameter models. They're very difficult to stand up. They're very difficult to use. These are not just asking ChatGPT. These are like purpose constructed models. It's just very hard to keep this thing running for a long period of time. The other problem with it is the models, as you saw in those little pictures, which I'm sure were incomprehensible to you, are very difficult to understand. They're not clear. They don't have sort of structures that are easily interpretable. So I can tell you, here's the distribution of positive events towards Democrats, or here's the distribution of events that express care or harm. But it's very hard for you to see the chain from like the text of the articles to the conclusions. And this is like just a big problem with large language models. And I've got a whole other sort of slice on this project, which is about how humans are really no better in that sense. We're both black boxes. We're different kinds of black boxes, but we're equally black boxes, and almost all the same problems that we've been itemizing for AI also stand for using humans to do this sort of stuff. So this led to like a very small project of like, okay, let's try to do some of this stuff without large language models using small language models. I chose this because it's a challenging domain. It's one where most of the mainstream media kind of agree on a lot of things, so the action is happening not in overt partisanship, but in sort of more covert stuff. And it's obviously highly contested, and there's lots of fighting that's going on. This is just an example of like the Times actively rewriting headlines as they get pressure coming in, so it's a very obviously controversial area. All right, not going to talk about my data, but it's traditional newspapers. So the news folks will be happy with this. Reporting on this topic. Let me skip some of these things. So again, we're using these sort of entities, adjectives, nouns. Basically, you can really just use parts of speech to sort of get at some of this. And the key thing is that when you look at nouns, it's not very informative. When you look at adjectives, not very informative. Nouns, not very informative. Verbs starting to sort of give you a better sense of what the story is about. But the key is that looking at events that has subject-verb combinations really gives a much better insight into what's going on there, and also allows you sort of to track over time. These are sort of the top events, which is to say a noun and a verb together, and you can see the first attack, you can see the hostage taking, you can see the story evolve just at the level of these 10 events. You can also look at it by outlet to sort of see how they're different. New York Times is very distinctive in running a series on sort of the building destruction in Gaza, which you might have seen. But it's also very different than some of the more conservative outlets, which tend to focus much more on sort of hostage holding and hostage taking. The other thing that you can do is sort of look at the sort of actions taken by, say, Palestinians or Gaza versus actions taken by Israel or Israelis. You can see that they're reported on very different. They take very different kinds of actions as reported in these news articles. So Israel is much more likely to reject, declare, or vow. Palestinians are much more likely to be imprisoned, displaced. Gaza is more likely to rule or to run. You can also do it on the receiving side. And you can put out these little sort of fingerprints for each of the outlets of like which particular things they emphasize more. So New York Times is much more likely to emphasize that Palestinians are dying or that Israel is imprisoning. One of the things that's kind of interesting here is that if you were to force this into a typology, the New York Times is probably the most sort of Gaza, Palestine, arguably left-leaning of the outlets here. I'm not going to itemize all these things, but each of these red and blue spots are showing like where these different outlets tend to be more emphasizing certain actions taken by one side or the other. The final thing that I'll say before I run out is sort of looking at the morality here. Here too, we're looking at sort of how the different outlets use moral language regarding Israel or Israelis, Gaza or Palestinians. The typology is we've got sort of positive or negative sentiments, the amount of emotionality in general, dominance, and then these moral values like care, fairness, authority, and loyalty. The main take-home here is just that the Israeli side tends to be just across the board have more sort of care, fairness, authority, and loyalty when being depicted, and the other side is the opposite, which is to say harm, unfairness, subversion, and non-loyalty. Wow. Sorry, I didn't realize that was going to blaze at me like that. And there's also, again, lots of interesting differences within the media, which I don't have time to go into. So just to wrap up, again, AI and humans, they're both black boxes. We need sort of transparent models that allow us to go from the text to the conclusions without like a bunch of AI or even a bunch of human coders in the middle in order to sort of make these things both illustrative to readers and sort of useful scientific models. And again, bias itself is this terrible muddle and probably shouldn't be used at all if we can avoid it. And it's much better to get beyond this and look at these sort of distributions of entities, stances, and moral values. But once we get beyond that, there becomes this question of, okay, so if it's not balance and neutrality, then what is it that Sulzberger and Lewis and Jeff Bezos. I mean, we know what they actually are after, but what should they ostensibly be after, if not that, once we've left this sort of unidimensional world behind? All right, so I'll stop there since my clock went, and we'll take questions at the end.
Yeah, we'll take questions at the end, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello? Okay, that's better. Yes, my name is Jen. Today I'm presenting one of our projects on an audit of Google search for politician search results. And I am from the Ladera Lab. My co-authors are Edison, Ronald, Brock, and David. All right, so why do we even care about the role of search engine? Because people often turn to news aggregator and search engine for their political information nowadays. And studies shows that 20% of Americans use search engine as their main gateway to news, which is the largest percentage among other gateways. And so, understanding the pattern of information that search engine gives us is important, and Google is like the dominant search engine for that. And political information is very important to for public to know, for political engagement, accountability, and reduce polarization, and it's very important for a healthy democracy. And we asked these research questions when searching from information on elected officials, for example, member of Congress, what types of domains are shown. And also how concentrated are search results on a few domains. And we find that it's very concentrated. And are different domains shown for Democratic politicians than Republican, which we find a significant but very moderate difference. And national domains show more than local domains, which is no. And is different content shown when searching locally from a politician's home district? And the answer is still no. And is politician content, controlled content, privileged by Google? And the answer is yes. So from the literature, there are some potential patterns in the news search outcomes. First is the high concentration. So previous study has found that there is high concentration of political information according to their source. So that inspires us to look at our search results from Google dominated by a few sources, and what are those domains? And there's also literature on partisan bias and echo chambers that lead us to ask, are search results different depending on the party of the House representatives being searched? And there's also a debate on the newspapers are being more nationalized, and we wonder whether Google prioritize local or national news, so whether they contribute to this process of nationalization. And are search results sensitive to the searcher's location? For example, whether searching from the politician's home district will be different. And in order to figure out these questions, we scrapped daily search results of U.S. House members, which are 435 of them, and we use an open package called Web Searcher, and we search the data covers from September 1st to 2020 to March 31st, 2021. And we simulated the searches from 435 congressional districts. So that allows us to detect this localization difference of the search result. And we collected all the results, not just news results, which are the majority data that are used from the previous research. Then we filtered the data according to the number of searches on the first page. So we only collect the first page of the data. And then we filter the dates that are have some arrows. So we have all the dates except for 12 of them. And we filtered politicians with irrelevant results. So there are 10 politicians with similar names to a famous person, and their results are not related to the politician themselves. Then, after we collect 600 over million results, we extract the domains, so the sources of this content from those URLs, and that gives us 8,000-ish unique domains. Then we also look at their rank on the page, what is the location that this search is from, and also we classify them into different types. And to give you an example, here's one of the search result pages. And as you can see, each of these block boxes is one of the results. And we are focusing on the blue boxes. So the top one is some image and with Google aggregated snippet, but we didn't include that because that's a Google aggregator. We are focusing on more what are the other sources that Google is drawing from. So the first result we are including is the house.gov, and then followed by Wikipedia, I guess. The number on each of the boxes is the rank that we are considering. And as you can see, this page gives us 15 results. And just a note that we only consider Twitter that gives us 3 posts, but on the similar location, so the 13th rank, as one result. So after collected all these results, we extract the URL link from the search results and classify the source, which is the domain of the URL, into 6 different types of results, which are campaign, personal, government, social media, education, news, and other third parties, which includes interest, advocacy groups, and most importantly, Wikipedia. And we use a hand labeling process to do this, and you can ask me more questions at the end if you want to. And here's what the distribution of different result types. So we find that the most of the search results are actually news. So that takes up 37%. Other things like government websites are also a very large portion, and social media is also very large. Other third party, mostly Wikipedia, is a very large portion as well. Education and campaign and personal is smaller in that sense. So let's look at a rank distribution of the different types. Okay, so basically, this gives us a sense of what Google is prioritizing. And as we can see, government website is concentrated on the top ranks. So that's mostly the first, second, third of the results. And that is shocking because government websites are not the most of the content. They only take 17%. And news is actually the largest percentage, but they are ranked so low that their average is 7 or something. And compared to the other distribution, you can see that the news is centered around the middle part. And social media is like also prioritized like on the very high rank. So on the top of the page, just follow the government websites. And okay, I only have 5 minutes, so I should move a little bit quicker. But anyway, so and then let's move on to look at. So as you notice, like the government websites and a lot of social media accounts are controlled by the politician, and we classified the domains further into different type, whether they are controlled by politician. And we do see that politician-controlled content are ranked much higher than the other contents, even though they are only 30% of all the results. We also find there's a high concentration on a few domains, which means that like only 7 domains takes up 50% of all the results. So those 7 domains are health.gov, wikipedia.gov, twitter.com, Bulletpedia, GovTrack, Congressional.gov, and Facebook.com. So all of these, none of them are news domains. And followed by them are some news domains, but all of them are national news. Then we are also wondering whether there are partisan difference, and we find like we plot a distribution by how often do they show up for a Republican politician or Democrat politician, and we find that like most of them are aligned them diagonal line actually, so they show up similarly frequently to both Republican and Democrat politicians. But there is like a small cluster on the left side corner, and if we zoom it out by log scale, we can see that actually more Republican-leaning domains are showing up more for the Republican politicians, and Democrat leaning domains show up for more Democrat politicians. However, this difference is like very small, even though they are like statistically significant. So we did a KS test on the two distributions, and we do find a significant difference. And we are also wondering, is Google killing traditional news by prioritizing non-news content? We did a label of whether the domains are news or not, and we see that all the non-news content are ranked higher than the news content. And like the news is like centralized on the 6th and 7th in the rank. And whether they prioritize local news over national news, actually not exactly. So they're not particularly prioritizing national news over local news on average. Both of them are ranked similarly on the result page. There is no significant difference. Okay, and where you search from matters is we look at the pairwise comparison of 2 result pages, and we did like calculate a similarity score, and we find that the difference between home and non-home searches are basically the same of non-home to non-home searches. So there's no difference, no sensitivity according to where you are searching from. All right, takeaways. So there's high concentration driven by government and third-party websites. And politician-controlled content is highly privileged. And there's moderate but significant partisan difference. And Google tend to prioritize non-news over news. And also, where you search from doesn't really matter. All right, cool. That is my presentation. Thank you so much.
So hello everyone, my name is Charlotte Lee, and I'm talking to you, or bringing this research to you from Northwestern University, where I worked in computational journalism lab with my advisor, Nick Diakopoulos. So I'm going to talk to you about probing GPT-4 for knowledge of journalistic tasks today.
You need to turn it on.
Actually, can you guys hear me? Okay, I'm not gonna use this. So I want to situate this research in a discussion of potential AI agents in different aspects of our lives. So pictured here is a screenshot of Neiman Labs' prediction for journalism that was published last year, and that they predicted that in 2024, everyone's going to get an AI agent. Now, what does an AI agent look like? Here are a few examples from the domain of research. So on the very left, you have Voyager, which is an AI agent that was built by NVIDIA to play Minecraft all on itself, and it makes decisions very similar to a human player. In the middle, you have a data set of some tasks that people use to experiment with AI web agents, which is you give it a natural language command and it will finish a bunch of tasks on like a website. And then on the right there we have Joris's paper. He's in the room. He'll be talking about it later. He was working on potentially having an AI agent develop tip sheets for journalists from a data set. So all of these are possible applications with an AI agent. And in addition to that, there was a lot of research on how AI can be of help in professional settings. So there was a research paper on opportunities for AI assistance in the domain of, or in the job of a data scientist. And then there's also research that was conducted through interviews and co-design workshops on how AI might be of help in the work of entrepreneurs. So in all of this, we consider how AI agents might be of help in the domain of journalism. To answer that question, we first want to think about what does the AI know about being a journalist. That is because most of the time when you give an agent a command, it needs to go through a series of step-by-step planning to be able to complete that command. So an example of that is if you tell an agent to, for example, put a story through production, you ideally want the agent to know that putting a story through production means that you'll have to put it through copy editing, and putting something through copy editing means that you'll probably have to look for information to fact check the story. So if the agent doesn't understand that those tasks compose the work of a journalist, it wouldn't be able to do it. So in that context, we set out to investigate what GPT knows about being a journalist. So to establish a baseline, we look at what human researchers think being a journalist is all about. And we look at ONET, which is a website that's sponsored by the Department of Labor. And they have a bunch of researchers, or they're called job analysts, who has been doing research on jobs for the past 20-something years. And specifically, we look at their report on the category of job under the name news analyst, reporters, and journalists. And we kind of consider this to be what we're talking about when we talk about journalists. And there are two types of information under this job category that we looked at. One of them is tasks. So there are total 30 tasks under the job category journalist. And these are specific descriptions of activities that are specific to the journalist job category. And these were developed in group discussions with journalists and their supervisors. Another category of information that we looked at is work activities. So these are more general descriptions that can apply to several different kinds of jobs. so they're not specific to journalists per se, but surveys were conducted to pick and choose which work activities are important for journalists. And here you can see some of the examples for each of these information. And given these information, we probed GPT-4 for a more comprehensive knowledge base of journalistic tasks using this prompt that's highlighted here. A few things that's worth noting about the prompt is we use the word as many tasks as possible, and we also ask for the tasks to be not duplicated and to be the same level of specificity. Just because, as you know, there's like a large body of work on prompting out there, and we want to eliminate the effect of prompts in our results as much as possible. And we wanted to get an exhaustive list of tasks from GPT-4. So given that prompt, what we ended up getting was 285 task descriptions from GPT-4. So that averages to about 10 to 20 tasks per work activity of the 19 work activities that we discussed earlier. With these tasks, we manually clustered them and labeled the clusters. And then iteratively, we nested the clusters and labeled clusters under larger themes. And eventually, we ended up with a journalistic task taxonomy with 6 high-level tasks, or 6 high-level categories. And you can see the full taxonomy if you scan this QR code. It might not fit on your phone screen, but you'll have the link. So here, I'm going to talk about each of the high-level categories just a little bit. So the 6 high-level categories are getting information, sense-making, editing, publication, distribution, productivity, and journalism training. So in getting information, there are tasks that aim to monitor, source, and gather information for reporting purposes. And tasks under this category are further divided by the types of sources. So there are like social media, experts, or scholarly resources, archives. And then they're also divided by a method of information gathering. So this includes like interviews or like an archival research. And lastly, there are also some tasks that has to do with maintaining sources, such as like reaching out to your like base of sources and check in. In sense making, this is actually a category that intersects with a lot of the other categories, as journalists have to make sense of things throughout the process of reporting and publishing. So tasks under this category look like maybe brainstorming for a story or researching materials for a story. Yeah. And then the next category is editing, which involves checking your work for readability, accuracy, legality, and other kind of journalistic standards like newsworthiness or like just like its potential to be published, and ethics as well. And then in the publication and distribution category, there are tasks that are related to publishing and delivering content to an audience that maximizes information spread and readership. So GPT-4 actually produced an array of very different ways to deliver content to readers, including like broadcasting, to like creating newsletters, to send through email through readers. And then under this category, there are also information regarding how journalists might engage with readerships. So things like responding to your audience questions on social media, or like hosting like a webinar to answer questions about your stories. And then under the productivity category, there are work activities or there are tasks that are related to increasing productivity and ensuring like the timely delivery of your work in the newsroom. So things under this category look like organizing your work, organizing deadlines, planning projects, or like communicating with your collaborators to make sure that your story gets done. And then in the last category, which is journalism training, tasks here are more related to developing skills to be able to do a journalistic job. And interesting to note here is journalism training was actually not a task or an activity mentioned on ONET, so the human researchers did not think this was an activity for journalists, but GPT, I guess, came up with this somehow from its knowledge base. And it's also worth noting that writing was mentioned in journalism training, but it was rarely mentioned in like the rest of most of the tasks. I think it was mentioned once, which is interesting because writing is a lot of what you do as a journalist. And then kind of to conclude, what we took away from this is that GPT-4 understands what a journalist does very well. It pretty much covered most of the tasks that was on ONET, other than the one task of operating equipments. And we had some questions about why writing was absent. We thought it could show that maybe there's a gap in what GPT knows how to undertake these tasks. So maybe it's able to plan, but not really able to like know how to accomplish them. It could also be a thing with prompting. Maybe in the prompt given to it, the writing wasn't really mentioned as much. And then we are hoping that this taxonomy can kind of serve as a basis to make a more full framework for understanding journalistic tasks, and also understand the opportunities for AI assistance within journalistic tasks. So moving forward, we want to engage with more practitioners to validate our research, and also potentially prompting it with different job titles within the newsroom to understand a more diverse result, as newsrooms have different, like very different roles. That's the end of my talk. This is how you can reach me if you have questions. I'm sure I'll answer it later as well. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Garrett Morrow. I'm here to present some work that myself and co-authors Harry, Kai-Cheng, and John have done over the past, let's say, 6 months. Public concerns over AI supercharging misinformation in the 2024 U.S. presidential election, and it is forthcoming in the Harvard Kennedy School Misinformation Review, but also available as a preprint if you are interested in looking at an earlier version. Now, I'm sure we all remember in 2020 when Donald Trump gave Anthony Fauci a big old hug and kiss on the nose, or not, because it didn't happen, along with some of these other images, photo of Donald Trump with the black community, Swifties for Trump, and during the New Hampshire primaries, a fake robocall going to New Hampshire voting, telling them to stay home. Now, all of these are AI generated. They are created by image creation software like Midjourney, I blanked on it for a second there, or other voice creation software. These sorts of AI materials are a concern for elections, in my opinion. in Slovakia last year, 3 days before the election, pro-Russian deepfake of audio implying that some of the election officials had rigged the vote was released 3 days before the election. Mark Warner, the senator who helped lead the 2016 investigation of Russian interference into that election, has called AI in this election the dog that has not barked yet. So far, these kinds of images in this election have, in my opinion, been pretty innocuous, but we still have a week and a half left to go, and it's hard to say where things will take us. So that brings us to our research questions. First one, to what extent are Americans concerned about AI spreading misinformation during the 2024 US presidential election? Number 2, do knowledge of and direct interactions with generative AI tools like ChatGPT or Midjourney contribute to the concerns? Number 3, does consuming AI-related news information contribute to the concerns? And number 4, what information sources contribute to people's concerns about AI spreading misinformation during the presidential election? To answer these questions, we drew upon public survey data. This is data done for the AI Literacy Lab, kind of launching it last year. This data was collected in August of 2023, so actually pretty far advanced of this year's election. We employed the firm Dynata to gather the survey results. We designed the survey and they run it, and it's consisted of non-random quota sampling. Going back to Julia's talk, we use that 1,000 magic number, US citizens aged 18 years or older, and compared to the 2020 census, the sample is representative in terms of age groups, gender, and race and ethnicity. So our measures here, and again, this is survey data, so it comes with all the caveats of self-reported data. Our dependent variable, how concerned are you that AI could be used to spread misinformation in the 2024 US presidential election? And the independent variables that we're concerned with or interested in here are demographics, things like age, gender, education, and whether or not someone works or majors in a STEM field. Knowledge of generative AI. So at the time of the survey, we asked them what the latest model of ChatGPT was. I think it was just after GPT-4 had been released. And so that was our kind of knowledge question. And then the use of generative AI. So how often do they use things like ChatGPT or Midjourney or DALL-E? And then finally, AI news consumption frequency. So how often they consume news about artificial intelligence. And then the sources of that AI news: television, social media, newspapers, magazines, things like that. Our finding is that there is a pretty high fear prevalence, that people are somewhat or very worried about AI spreading misinformation during this year's election. We also find in the red box here that one of the main factors seems to be the frequency in which people consume news about artificial intelligence. So this part on the right, the more news someone consumes about artificial intelligence, the more worried they are about interference. The knowledge of or the use of generative AI tools doesn't seem to mitigate this fear at all. There's not too much of an interaction here in terms of significant values, and age does seem to be a factor, however. Older people tend to be more fearful of artificial intelligence spreading misinformation during the election. So the next question, the source, comparing all the different types of news that someone may consume. Television news seems to be the only one in our results that was statistically significant. And this is particularly, again, among older Americans. Within our 65 plus category, those who consume TV news as a primary source of their news about artificial intelligence were significantly more worried than those who did not rely on television news. So what does this all tell us about the public concerns about artificial intelligence interfering or providing misinformation during the election? To answer our first research question, we see that there is high fear across all of the groups, particularly among older adults. Do the knowledge of ChatGPT or direct interactions with generative AI tools contribute to these concerns? We did not find that that was true. Does consuming AI-related news information contribute to the concerns? Yes. And what sources? Television news, primarily with older adults. So takeaways from this study. We think it provides a good baseline for future studies or current studies of understanding the intersection between public perception of AI, elections, and disinformation. So again, this data was collected in August of 2023. So quite a while ago, really before people had started considering the election. And as we've gotten closer to the election, I imagine that these fears are the same or even higher. Again, we found that experience with AI, or generative AI in particular, does not allay or heighten the fears of AI misinformation during the election. That said, again, August 2023, it's a fairly new technology, but less than a majority of our survey sample had actually used these tools. So kind of the uptake of a new technology is pretty remarkable here in terms of the percentage of people using it. But for a technology like artificial intelligence that is supposedly supposed to be ubiquitous eventually, at the time, only 32% of respondents had ever used a text-based generative AI tool, like ChatGPT, and only 15% had used image-generating AI. So it's possible that since August 2023, more people have used these tools, and the use of these tools and knowledge of these tools has affected whether or not they are fearful of AI generating tools around misinformation. There's this concept of TV news portraying the world as mean. Coverage of if it bleeds, it leads, that cliche. We think that there could be a transitioning of this to, within television news in particular, to a mean AI syndrome. So artificial intelligence is nefarious. It is only intended to cause fraudulent or the creation of fraudulent materials. And so therefore, we cannot trust it. We think there is a need for continued media and AI literacy, particularly around how these tools work, what they can and cannot do, and how they can interact with producing information around elections. And finally, we think there's a need for balanced AI news reporting, which requires journalists to understand the functioning, risks, and benefits of generative AI, just like the rest of us do. So I'll try to keep my talk short in order to move on to questions and answers. So thank you all.
Go ahead.
Hi, this question goes to Professor Lee. Your talk is really amazing, and when you use the verbs, adjectives, and moralities to evaluate the bias, how do you pick these words? Is there a framework, and how would you approach this?
Yeah, so the verbs and the nouns is just whatever is most common in the corpus that we're dealing with. The moral values, there's various typologies out there. One of them is the moral foundations typology, developed by Jonathan Haidt and colleagues, and they have associated with it sort of word lists. Those word lists, are very debatable. There are, thousands of words associated with authority or whatever. So there's many reasons to question them. But the nice thing about it is it's very transparent. The list is clear. You know what the words are. You can track exactly why a event or a sentence or something has been assigned these values. So it's fairly straightforward, and that was sort of the hope, is to make it sort of more transparent, even at the cost of maybe more dubious. So I guess the one other thing I wanted to mention is that I'm happy to, if anyone wants to sort of talk about how to implement these things or making these things into tools people can use, I'm happy to talk about that more. Particularly, we're interested in the side of making not just a tool that produces an output, but making it clear each step of the way how it gets to that output.
Thank you so much. Your sharing is so generous. I really wish we had more time to discuss that.
But we have plenty of time to talk afterwards if you want.
Go ahead.
Can I ask the second question? Sorry.
I want to give everybody a chance, but please, I think, in the break.
Sure.
My question is for Charlotte. I'm really interested in agentic AI within the news context, and I'm curious if this research is kind of what is next on pushing this forward for you? Are you starting to think at all about what a framework could be for what we accept from an AI agent in the newsroom? This is what it thinks the task is. At what point do we allow it?
Yeah, there are kind of two directions I'm thinking about taking with this work. One is that I definitely want to engage practitioners of news to kind of just talk about what they do, what they think they're doing in the newsroom before I kind of run with this taxonomy and say that it is comprehensive. Yeah, so definitely validation of the taxonomy and see what it's missing. Another thing we're thinking about is kind of how to evaluate the successful completion of these tasks. So like kind of benchmarking what the successful completion of the task would look like. What data set would you need to benchmark this? And what criteria are there to determine that a task is done successfully?
Thank you for your presentation. But when you said that Google prefers non-news websites over news, where showing the social media is almost 30%, were you able to analyze within the social media, for example, Twitter, that do they need links of news websites or not?
That is a very good question. We actually sampled from all the social media URLs and look at like what are those content and how much are controlled by the politician. And I would say like the lowest rate is 89%, which is for Facebook, and which is for Instagram. And like Twitter is like 99% controlled by the politician, so it's the official account of the politician. And also like so we checked all these links, and except for YouTube. YouTube is mostly not politician controlled. So YouTube is the one that is mostly news. We didn't analyze which news are them. But like, so that gives us a sense that most of the social media are politician accounts, and most YouTube videos are news.
Round this up with a question for Garrett. So I'm curious about how much you think that people are actually aware of how much AI news they're consuming. Like, why are you expecting that people are able to estimate that on like a survey? Do you think there's any kind of proxy that it is kind of for like general interest in AI or anything like that? Or
Yeah, that's a good question. It kind of goes back to the flaws of any self-reported survey data is asking someone in retrospect, how often do you consume news about AI? So they have to kind of try to recall, oh, once a week, once a month, every day, multiple times a day. And so that does make it, somewhat difficult. But we think that it does serve as artificial intelligence is of course been in the news frequently over the lot, and it's kind of hard to say in what context that news that might include the word AI or something about AI, in what context they're seeing that news. And so it's difficult within the survey to like separate, is it just a story mentioning AI specifically about like the risks that it might pose, or is it just, here's AI, the new model from Facebook or whatever. So that is a bit more difficult to do. We'd certainly like to do more follow-ups with people and do like interview focus groups around like, what is the news telling you? What sort of stories are you actually seeing, or more like actual like left scraping type of research? But this is just a start of kind of our understanding of cultural perceptions. But great question, thank you.
All right, thank you to all the speakers. Thank you for the questions.